heard a lot about you. I can't wait to hear the rest of your story. Uh, it's just an amazing and inspiring career you're having, not had, but I guess you view it in different phases. But I'd love to start almost at the beginning. Tell us about where you grew up, how you grew up, what kind of family situation did you have?
I grew up in Michigan, and
Now, where in Michigan? Because I know Michigan is totally
oh, Michiganders always have the hand. So I'm South Central, so just north of Toledo, Ohio, actually.
okay.
So grew up from a half mile from the Ohio line,
Hmm.
and grew up there. My dad was in construction, which Michigan winters were not good for construction. So my parents divorced when I was 10, which was not popular back then. Divorced when I was 10, and my dad moved to Texas. So school years in Michigan, and and winters in Michigan, and my summers with my dad in Texas. So I like to say I'm weather hardened.
I would say yes. And we're in Texas.
So I live in Dallas now.
Yeah. And
Mhm.
I want to get quickly to your career, but you didn't set out to have the career you first had. You went to high school, you went to college. What did you get a degree in when you were in college?
So I have a degree in art with a minor in mathematics and an associate's degree in engineering.
Well, of course.
It makes perfect sense, right? So perfect sense. No, I was planning on going into architectural engineering.
That's architecture is one of those rare right brain, left brain professions, right? Ergo, the art and the mathematics and the engineering. I marvel at those folks. You know, when you see something that's beautifully designed, be it a tool or a device or a piece of furniture or a home or a building, when it's really well done, it just makes a difference.
It's really interesting because when you get to high level math, it's very creative. It's about proving theorems and knot theory and donut theory and all these weird theorems. And then when you get to high level art, it becomes very scientific. So there's actually this really beautiful convergence of the art and science.
I've not heard it explained that way, but in some sense, it seems to make sense anyway. We live in New York, and as you walk around New York, when new buildings are going up, I was in London recently, and it seems that in London, the architecture in the most recent decade has become more about the outside of the building, the things that the public can see, of being more thoughtful about design than perhaps it's been the case in New York. Although the recent constructions, new buildings being renovated or put up in New York, are emphasizing good creative. Now, by the way, a couple of those buildings that I have in mind are designed by a British architectural firm, the Norman Foster firm. But you're right. At some point, the right and left brains do converge, and certainly that was your intent. But what did you do work wise right out of school?
So, so my last year of college, I met and married what I call the starter husband.
Practice.
So, yes, the starter, and he was getting ready to go into the military. So he joined the military, and at first it was like the stars aligned. He was going to be stationed at Fort Hood, Texas. He already had his orders, and he was going to be at Fort Hood, Texas, where University of Texas at Austin had one of the top architectural engineering programs for my master's degree. And I was like, it is meant to be. And then after we got married, his orders got changed to Fort Polk, Louisiana.
Well, that's not exactly fair.
No, no. So we ended up moving to Louisiana, and there were no jobs. So back then, that base didn't even have, the town didn't even have a Walmart. I mean, there was nothing.
Wow, I'm
They
surprised
didn't,
outside a military base, no Walmart.
no Walmart. So the only thing outside the military base, it was fast food restaurant, pawn shop, fast title loans and strip club and a beer barn. So,
So, which of those did you choose to work in?
so I ended up working in a pizza place.
Thank
So
God.
yeah, right. But 5 years of college and working in a pizza place, I felt unsatisfied, we'll just say.
Shocking.
So yes, things weren't going well. And I looked at myself and I looked at, the starter husband at the time. And I said, what can I do? So I started really looking at what was possible. And it came to me that what was possible was if he could be in the Army, well, I could be in the Army. So I decided to join the Army, but I wanted a cooler job. He was a medic, and there's nothing wrong with the medical profession except it was not for me. So I did not want to see blood or deal with blood. I don't like to look at my own blood. So I knew that wasn't for me. And I didn't know what cool jobs were. I didn't know what I could do. So the one thing I was really good at was research. I went on to the base and I just asked around. I knew I could go in as an officer with my college degree. So I asked officers what would they do if they had to do it different? And what do they wish they had done? And I asked them, what's the coolest job? And everybody told me it was being a helicopter pilot. So I said, well, I'll do that.
And of course, there were a load of women doing that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I didn't know it was hard. I didn't know that they'd only let women into aviation, about 15 years before that. But the Army, like the Air Force, when they let women in, they did like whole classes of women all together to integrate them in. And the Army did not. They were letting women in small batches. So I didn't know that it was hard. I didn't know it was hard to get into. I didn't know it was hard to do the training. I didn't know that think about it. We didn't have internet, right? So I didn't know all these things were hard.
So you enlist in the Army right there in Louisiana,
Hmm.
and so they take you right into the same fort. That's where the training was taking place.
No, so it's interesting. You go to a recruiting station and you have to sign a contract basically for the
There in
job.
Louisiana.
You sign the contract there, but they don't do the training there. So you go through, and so when I walked in and told the recruiter I wanted to be a helicopter pilot, you can probably guess what he said.
You said, "Oh, that's a good idea."
You can't do that. You can't do that. And so I had to, but I'd already done the research. I'd already gone out to the flight line on the base. I'd already talked to pilots. I already looked up the program.
Had
There's
you been in a helicopter before? Hot
mm-mm,
stuff.
nope. Mm-mm. So I did end up
Were
going
there
in
other
the air.
female helicopter pilots on that base?
Nope. We're talking at a time that less than 1% of all the pilots were
Uh
women.
huh.
Out of 200 to 250 pilots, there was one woman.
Wow.
So there weren't very many. There were no, like when I walked in to the flight line to talk to the pilots, it did not even occur to me that they were all men. Like,
They were just the
didn't
pilots.
even, they were pilots. So it wasn't that big of a deal, right? The recruiter said no. I found out later that uh, he didn't so recruiters get points and they have to track and everything of what they bring in, and they didn't get any credit for bringing in an officer.
Oh, interesting. So behaviorally, not the best situation for you.
No, and he didn't know how to do the paperwork, and he didn't want to do the paperwork because why should I spend the time doing your paperwork when I could spend time in something that's going to benefit me? So he didn't help me. So I sat in his office and I read the regulations and I did his paperwork.
Did he at least sign it?
Well, he had no choice. I wouldn't leave his office. So I have a little bit of tenacity in me.
So, so what happens? They send you notice. Yes, we've accepted your application.
So you have to do a whole bunch of testing. So I had to take the flight aptitude skills test. I had to take the officer review testing. I had to take,
You do that all in Louisiana.
yep. They have a military entrance processing station for all the branch, not just the Army, but for the Air Force, for everybody, that where you do your physical. So they're done consistently. You do your physical, I had to go to a flight doctor and do another physical that was more intense. I had to do all the aptitude testing and screenings, and everything came back good. And then because I was going to apply for flight school, I had to go before a review panel, which is like all these board of officers that interviewed me. So basically, an interview process. So I had to go through that. So all that had to be consolidated together with absolutely perfect paperwork. So like not one typo. And back then it was carbon paper and typing. So one mistake, you started over.
Elizabeth, how old are you? Carbon paper.
I know, right? So, but it was carbon paper back then. Well, of course, it was military. It was telex. Like we'd get the dot matrix printers and all that stuff then. So I was in my 20s and I'm sitting there typing. And all they had to go to the Pentagon for a selection board. And I'll never forget my paperwork went to the Pentagon in November. And it didn't pass. It didn't go through. And so and your paperwork can only go up for two times. And it didn't go through because they didn't have any spots. It wasn't because my paperwork's bad. It wasn't because they picked somebody else. They had no spots available.
No spots in the flight training program you wanted.
Right. So in this program, which they affectionately called high school to flight school. So they had no spots. So that's 1 month and there was no spots. So now I'm like nervous, right?
Yeah,
So
because
my
now
pack.
you only get one other review, and even if you're fine, but there's no spots, strike two, you're out.
Correct. So I'm nervous. And so I go, the paperwork goes up for in December and it's not like it's not like you're zoomed in, right? So it was all just waiting to hear back. And so my packet went up in December and then I'll never forget, it was like January 3rd by the time I found out. But I found out I got one of the two spots they had in the nation.
Wow.
So, and I was starting in March.
And
It was like,
starting in March, and where are you off to?
so they sent me to Fort Jackson, South Carolina for basic training
Uh-huh.
because I had to go through basic training. I was brand new. And then from basic training, they sent me straight to Warrant Officer Candidate School
Where was Warrant Officer Candidate School?
at Fort Rucker, Alabama, which now all the bases have new names. So I don't know. I can't think
So
it's,
you're learning the Southeast very well.
yes, yes. So Fort Rucker, Alabama for flight school. And we always say, again, the names have all changed now, but we used to say that you always go home to Mother Rucker. So all Army aviation is taught there.
So you've already been basic, you've already been through Officer Candidate School. Now you show up for flight training. Have you ever been
Hmm.
in a helicopter to this point?
Nope. Nope.
So when do you finally get your butt in a helicopter?
So it's really fast. And it's not like that. Since 9/11, they've now added, because I was only like 8 weeks basic training, a week in between for travel, getting to candidate school. And then from candidate school, that's only 6 weeks. And then I was in a helicopter the next month. Like I graduated on Friday. I was in a well, you go through aeromed training, aerodynamics training, systems training. So you learn the systems of the helicopter. And then, but within 3 months, you're in a helicopter.
Wow. And what's that first time like?
Terrifying.
And what kind of a helicopter did you train in?
So back then, the training was in the the Vietnam era Huey helicopter.
And you're one of how many women in this particular class?
I was not only the only woman in my class, but I was the only woman for the 6 classes ahead of me and the 5 classes after me. So in fact, in candidate school, and you have to go through either candidate school or if you're a lieutenant coming in as a lieutenant, you'd go through a different their OCS candidate school. I went through WOCS for Warrant Officer Candidate School. Those are the only ways into flight school.
Mm-hmm.
And in my Warrant Officer Candidate class, we started with 7 women and only 2 of us finished.
Wow. And that was all for flight training.
No, well, no, there's other warrant officers. There's what we call walking warrants. So you could be a quartermaster as a warrant. You could be a nuclear specialist. There's a lot of specialized jobs in the Army that are where they want you to do your job and get left alone. And so versus officers, so lieutenants all the way up to generals, their first job is to lead. Their training, what they receive their training in is secondary.
Huh.
So enlisted, they have the training per se, but they also get pulled off to do other tasks. And so back in the Civil War days, they decided that someone needed to take care of the horses as a full-time job. So they created the Warrant Officer Corps. And the Warrant Officer Corps are officers based on technical and tactical proficiency. So they get to do their job and get left alone. They don't get pulled off like the enlisted do, and they don't have to worry about the leadership roles, although that has changed some. But they didn't have to worry about the leadership roles, so they just did their job.
Got it.
And and now instead of horses, it's a different kind of horsepower with the helicopters and the pilots.
But still horses in the name, horsepower.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So how long is flight training?
So back then it was 42 weeks.
Pretty intense, huh?
Very intense. So 42 weeks, 16-hour days.
Tell us, think back, your scariest moment.
Oh, well, the scariest moment was realizing I had drawn a biased flight instructor who didn't want me to pass.
Ooh, tell us.
Yeah, did not want me to pass, wanted me to fail. So, and did everything he could to make me fail. So he screamed at me, and flying a helicopter requires a very soft touch on the controls, a soft touch.
Yep.
A small movement in the cyclic is a big movement in the rotor system. And
It
so, in
projects
fact,
up.
oh yeah, in fact, they say that you only have to move it around the distance of a quarter for most of the motion of a helicopter.
Wow.
It's a very small motion.
So having someone screaming in your ear isn't conducive to subtle, soft movement.
No, you tend to clench and overcorrect and go too far and back too far and back too far and back too far. And the helicopter responds, and it's what we call it over controlling, right? So how many times we over control things in life too, but we over control. We go too far to the right and back too far to the left and back too far to the right, and we start doing this with like a swinging pendulum underneath the rotor system, and that's a prohibited maneuver.
Yeah.
Don't do that one. So he would take the controls away from me, and he would yell at me again, and this happened day after day after day. The first phase of flight school is called initial entry rotary wing, where you have to learn how to do basic maneuvers that are foundational and everything is built on.
Yep.
So how to hover, get up off a landing pad and go somewhere, and how to come into land, which is built on hovering. And so all these maneuvers were built on hovering, and I wasn't hovering. So I was failing all these maneuvers that I had to pass to move on to the next phase.
How did you overcome that?
So the first thing is they wanted me to quit. Like, they were trying to make me quit. And I just knew that I hadn't gone through, basic training, candidate school, the Pentagon Review Selection Committee. I hadn't gone through all that for nothing. And so I refused to quit. I refused to quit. I just kept showing up, even though it was hard. And I showed up, even though I wanted to just cry. And I showed up, because that was the only thing I could do to keep moving forward.
And where are you bivouacked then? You're the only woman in the program. Did I have a separate dorm for you? I imagine there's a little bit of loneliness going on as you're under this pressure and you're kind of isolated.
Yeah. So I was in the office because I was an officer after candidate school. I was in the bachelor officer quarters. So basically like a dorm apartment building. So,
Was it lonely?
So I was, at the time, I was still married to my starter husband, and I still thought he was there for me. And then it was shortly thereafter that I found out he wasn't, and he wasn't supportive, and we ended up getting a divorce. And that was more lonely. But by then, flight school was going good for me, so it was okay.
And how are your fellow students reacting to you? They see it's clear to everyone that the instructor wants you to fail. So do they feel like they need to be isolated from you because they don't want to get caught in his wrath? What's that dynamic like?
Yeah, it was a lot more distant. So they didn't want to get involved, right? They didn't want to have it affect their status in flight school.
They didn't want the contagion.
Mm-hmm. So, so you really, the only person who really knew about it is what we call your stick buddy. So you're never alone with the flight instructor. You always have a stick buddy. And so my stick buddy, Ryan, he was there. And so he heard it. Like he's up on the radios and he hears it, but he can't get involved. Right. So again, it could impact or blow back on him. So there's not much he could do, but he he tried. I mean, in his as much as he could, but um, there's a limit. There's a limit to what you do. So when you're in powerless situations that are completely out of your control, there's a limit to how much I could do. There was a limit to how much he could do.
When do you find out you're going to pass?
So it's an 8 week at that time, an 8 week introduction section that I had before I can get to the next one, which was instrument training. And so on the 7th week, it's the Monday morning of the 7th week. And I will tell you, I was nearly defeated, but I'm still showing up. My body language was, head down, shoulders down, and I'm trudging on. I'm at this point, it's more stubbornness than anything else, right? So because I don't know how this is going to happen, and I don't know how I'm going to pass, and I don't know how I'm going to get moved to the next phase when I'm failing all these basic maneuvers. And when I walked in that Monday morning, I looked up. He wasn't there. Yes. It was a substitute instructor. And I am just thinking, I've got a shot, I've got a chance, and I can do this. But when I walk up to the table, Jim, he was looking at all my grade sheets. All 6 full weeks of failing grades, right? 30 grade sheets stacked deep in paper, right? Every single sheet from every single day was failing. And that's not a very good first impression.
No, I'd say.
So when I speak to companies and corporations, I'm like, would you hire someone that had that kind of impression? No, right? So as I walk up to the table, he looks at all that paperwork he'd already been looking at. And he looks up at me and he asks me, "What's the deal?" Now, what could I possibly say?
What did you say?
What could I say that wouldn't sound like I was making an excuse? What could I say that wouldn't sound like I was blaming someone else for my results? Right? And I have to tell you, I had nothing. I mean, I had nothing. I totally blanked. I froze. I didn't know what to say until it came to me what to say in a difficult situation.
Hold it. Can we hear the drum roll?
I know, right? If you're taking notes, you want to write this down, right? So, what to say in a difficult situation. And so, here's what I said. I'm trying really hard. And then he yells at me. And I'm blubbering. I am crying. It just exploded out of me. And oh,
Where in your pilot training does it say blubbering is the
oh,
way out?
no, I'm the only girl. I'm like the only girl in the whole building. Oh my gosh, I was like the only, well, I'll take that back. There was a female in the building, the secretary. So like that was a civilian. I was mortified. Oh, it was so bad. You don't cry in the military. Like
You don't cry in
it's
baseball either.
oh no, not in baseball either, right? So military's worse than baseball, okay? So I am, and I'm just crying, and he does a typical male response in my experience, which is, "Please stop, please stop, hands up, please stop, please stop, stop." And I had to stop, and I had to dry it off, but he looks at me and he says 4 words that will never forget.
Pens out again.
Yep. And the 4 words he said to me are, "Do you want this?" And those are 4 words that I ask myself anytime things get hard. And those are 4 words, flipping the you to an I and asking yourself, do I want this? When you're feeling stuck, when things get hard, can help you stay connected and committed to the passion and the fire that sometimes just gets tired.
How did you respond?
I said, yeah. Yeah, I wanted to say, duh, right? Why would I be here? Duh. But now, not an appropriate response. So sometimes you have to filter
How did
those.
he respond?
He was like, great, let's do this. Like, he totally was
So
there
what
and
happened that
present.
day?
He taught me how to hover in one day.
Get out.
Yeah, one thing. It was one little thing. He taught me how to brace my elbow so I'd have a more stable platform for my wrist and my hand.
Sure.
One thing the other instructor had never taught me, or Ryan, my stick buddy, because he didn't want me to pass.
Yeah.
So the new instructor taught me more in that 1 week.
So he was there for the week. Okay, so you get the first day. He gives you the anchor position, how to anchor yourself, give yourself a good foundation. Now you're able to be subtle at the extension of your arm and your hand. You're hovering, and now all of a sudden, boom, breakthrough for you emotionally, breakthrough for you in terms of your skills, skill development, and I'm guessing on how your fellow classmates viewed you.
At that point, I think they were just everybody at that point was just concerned about passing the next week, right? The final exam. I think they just kind of was worried about themselves more than their
So
classmate.
word gets back to the permanent instructor the next week.
So the next week he came back from his week vacation and he's thinking, ha 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 ha, fail, right? And he couldn't fail me because I knew just enough to pass. But what happens when you have 6 weeks of bad habits and bad techniques, right? And I had 1 week of doing it right. It wasn't pretty. In fact, it was ugly, right? It was an ugly pass. And one of the things that I teach now when I tell the story is that practice makes, and what does everybody say?
Perfect.
Right. But I had lots of practice doing it wrong.
Yep.
So how I shift the paradigm here is that practice makes permanent.
Hmm.
How we practice determines how we perform. How we practice determines how we show up in life and in business. And everything we do today builds our tomorrow because practice makes permanent, not perfect.
So you graduate from that 8-week program, and now it's on to
Oh, instrument mode, and then combat skills, and then night vision training are all part of our different phases that I had to go
how many
through
more
to
weeks after the 8?
42 weeks in total, so 34 weeks.
And now your skills are coming up. You're no longer the back of the class. You're
Instruments, I loved instruments. I love to fly instrument, which is usually everybody hates it, but
sure.
for me, it was creative.
Well, it goes beyond your natural, your natural inclinations.
Yeah, so it was creative. So I loved flying instruments. So I actually did really well in that next phase. And then combat skills is like nap of the earth flying and how to do different mission modes that you learn how to fly and read maps. Ooh, how to read maps, um, terrain maps. And so we had that, and then flying night vision goggles. So, and then after that, we go into what's called Warrant Officer Basic Corps, which is like a finishing school, they called it. You go do escape and evasion training. You have a dining out, so you get all dressed up in your uniform and know how to do your uniform as an officer and how to like table manners at the
Is
dining.
that right?
It's truly like a finishing school,
No
like
kidding.
how to handle yourself as an
I guess I
officer.
figured time to teach you now because your skill sets have been trained, and you're going to go into the officer corps, and you're going to go into a leadership role in your specialty, and you ought to know how to act now. You might as well invest in the finishing touches.
Yeah, sometimes in the military we're a little rough around the edges. So they invested in helping us be ready for that next phase.
And how long did you then serve in the Army?
So I did just shy of 8 years.
And
So
stationed where?
Fort Drum, New York, 10th Mountain Division. So pretty tough assignment there.
I would think it's very tough being in a mountain group in a helicopter role.
It was, and also being a woman. So out of our entire battalion level, there were only two of us,
Ah,
two women, and the other one was not in my unit. There, she was in a different unit. And then after that, I got stationed in Germany. So, and while I was in Germany, we were deployed to Kosovo.
wow. Why
Hmm.
did you leave the army, Elizabeth?
I was injured.
In Kosovo?
I, I was supporting Kosovo from Germany. And during that time, I received negligent medical care from a doctor. So it was completely preventable, shouldn't have happened. And I got out May of 2001, right before September 11th.
Wow. What an experience, what a career. And it's so obvious how that experience shaped you and trained you for the work you're doing today. So let's move on to that. You had the practice husband, and now there's apparently you graduate to the next level.
So after I got out of the military, I worked in corporate America for 8 years. So I did, when you only fly 2 days a week, usually, unless you're an instructor pilot or a maintenance pilot. And I was in the safety track. So you only fly a couple days a week. The other days you're expected to have a job and you're actually evaluated. It's absolutely expected that you are a top performing pilot. You're actually evaluated as an officer based on how you do your other jobs that you have. And so for me, mine was property book and inventory management. So I handled all the inventory, and then during Kosovo, I handled import export and flew back and forth from Kosovo to Germany and handled. I actually was doing a real live officer, not a warrant officer's job, during that time. So I had all this experience in property books. So when I was injured and couldn't fly anymore, I came back to Texas. I just chose to move to Texas. They, I got a job in a warehouse as property management. So I was a inventory accountant was the role I was in. Worked my way up in that company from inventory accountant to second in command over the with the VP of logistics over the entire logistics warehouse purchasing. The whole purchasing department reported to me. Um, and then got headhunted to another company and then got headhunted to another company.
Did you
So
stay in
within
the
eight,
Dallas area in those moves?
I did. My dad lived here and I wanted to be closer to family. And then, during that time, in fact, a month after September 11th, I met my keeper husband on a blind date.
No kidding. A blind date.
Hmm. Yep. And we both grew at the weird thing. We met in Dallas on a blind date in Dallas, and we both grew up in Michigan.
The stars were aligned. And what
Hmm.
does he do?
So he works for Texas Instruments.
Hmm.
So he repairs the machines that put the chemicals in the thin layers of glass to a certain specification
Wow.
to make the chips.
Hmm. And
So,
tell us about your life, business life today.
so I worked in corporate for about 8 years, and during the last couple years when I was working, I was the community I lived in found out I was a helicopter pilot. So to me, my patriotism had always been really private, and but they found out I was a helicopter pilot through my children and the schools, and they asked me to come in and speak. So I came in and I would do a little speaking, and every time I did one event, I would get 5, 6 more phone calls asking me to come speak to other schools and other youth groups and church groups and women's groups and men's groups. And I did a little bit here and there around my corporate job when I could, but I had to say no to a lot of
Well, you had
them.
a day
So
job.
I had a job. I had a real job. So I'm turning a lot of them down. And one day I was turning one down and they said, well, we'll pay you. And I'm
Hello?
like,
What do you mean, pay
shut,
me?
shut the door. I could get paid for this. What? And they're like, yeah, we'll pay you. And I was like,
And
okay,
what
how
was that?
much will you?
Do you remember what that group was? That first group that said, we'd like you to speak and we're willing to pay?
I can see the woman's face, but I can't remember the name of the
Yeah.
group or her name.
So how was that
Yeah.
experience? That's a lot more pressure when you're not doing them a favor.
Right. So, and I was like, how much will you pay me? And they're like, we'll pay you $500 for a 45-minute lunch. And I'm like, well, that's more an hour than what I'm making in my corporate job. So I was like, okay. So I took a vacation day for that one and I did that one and it went really
Yeah.
well. And so they liked me. And the next thing I know, they referred me to other events and groups. And I started getting more calls now for paid engagements. And again, I'm working on a corporate job. In fact, at the time, my job was I was an international contract negotiator for a manufacturing plant and was traveling to Japan and Sweden and England and France. And I specialized in the international markets. So I wasn't home a lot. So I am turning a lot of them down and but the calls are still coming in and I'm just turning them down.
Now you mentioned kids learning, neighbors learning about you being a helicopter pilot through your kids. How many? How old are they now?
So now my daughter, who I had when I was in the military, she is 29. Yes, I just totally dated myself there.
Yep.
Yes. And then I have a son with my keeper husband. So, and he is now 20.
So now the speaking thing starts to pick up a little bit more. You have this international travel, which is a tiresome bit of. It's interesting at first, then it becomes a chore to make all those trips, especially when you have young kids to take care of. And now the
Well, and this corporation that I was with, they made me come back to Dallas before going to the next event. Like I could
you
not,
couldn't go
which didn't
Sweden
make,
to London. You had to go Sweden to Dallas to
nope.
London.
Hmm.
That's strange.
Yep. Yeah. It was just the way they did things, but it was not great to be the only person traveling like that and not have any understanding of.
Did the president of American Airlines come up and pick you up at your home?
No, not wasn't that much travel, but it was because I'd be, there 2 or 3 days negotiating a contract, visiting a vendor, checking their quality, different things like that.
Now, I have a buddy, Elizabeth, who worked at uh, Sikorsky for years, and he tells
Mm.
me one of the things about the helicopter you flew, the Black Hawk, is that it has over 20,000 individual parts, and that it required 4 hours of maintenance for every hour in the air. Can you verify that?
Yeah, we would do 2 to 3 hours of pre-flight planning at minimum,
Yeah.
just for a training mission, let alone a real mission. We would do 2 to 3 hours of planning and maintenance is it's different. Like at the unit level it wasn't that much maintenance, but when you factor in what we called depot level maintenance and the higher level maintenance and how much downtime the aircraft had for maintenance, probably pretty close to that.
Because he said, 20,000 parts, and you put them in the shakeometer. He says there's a lot of screw tightening goes on.
Yeah, we had to go through when we do a pre-flight and you climb up on the top of the helicopter underneath the rotor blades and you open up all the compartments and each screw and nut has either like a I'm trying to think what it's called. They either have like a wire across it to keep it from moving, or it has like a kind of like a marker line. It's not marker though. It's something more permanent.
Yep.
But they have a line, and if you're checking to make sure they didn't move.
And a lot depends on that.
Oh yeah. It doesn't take much.
So do you keep your flying skills up?
No, the injury I have won't allow me to fly.
Oh, too bad.
So yeah, so I get to talk about it.
Yep. Tell us about life today now, your professional life. And I'm intrigued by the things that you've developed in terms of advice and counsel to give to others. And I was reading it the other day, and geez, it makes so much sense and reflects on some of the things that my co-author and I did in our book about that we released recently. But tell us about the acronym pilot that you developed. I think that's so clever and so easily rememberable.
Yeah. So P is for potential, believing in your potential. Like I had to believe in my potential with the recruiter and all the situations I was in more than anybody else believed. And I know I get asked a lot, like, who mentored you? Like, nobody. You have to be fully aware that you have to mentor yourself and you have to believe in yourself more than anybody else did. So the I is implementation, because if you believe in yourself and your abilities, then you need to take action and do something and not get stuck in the analysis paralysis and everything. So you have to do something. And then the L is about leading. So, and I have a simple acronym underneath leadership, and that's communicate, aviate, navigate. Everything you do in leadership is either communication, aviating is taking action, or it's visioning and planning. Everything falls under those three things. And I think a lot of quote experts out there are making leadership hard. It's not hard. If you do those three things and just focus on communicating, taking action, and then the planning, and they all work together symbiotically. O is optimal performance. How you show up matters. How you show up for yourself, how you show up for your family, how you show up for your work, how you show up for your business.
Give us a little color on how you show up.
So I think we have live in a society that is chronically underslept, right? And doesn't get enough sleep, doesn't take care of themselves. We think everything we do has to be for everybody else. And especially I think as women, we suffer from that, where we're nurturing and we have to take care of everybody else, and we end up neglecting ourselves. And what happens over time when you don't take care of yourself, you suffer, right? Your attention suffers, your focus suffers, your health suffers, your family suffers. um, Taking care of yourself is foundational so that you can perform better for everything and everyone else, including yourself.
And T.
T is for tenacity. It's for showing up when things get hard and not giving up when it's something that you have a vision on and that you firmly believe in.
Elizabeth, you're a hero to many people. Who are some of the heroes in your life?
Um, when I think of heroes, I think of people that stood up in adversity, that showed up in adversity. So, Amelia Earhart, Bessie Coleman. I think we don't have enough of that now. I think people are more have a larger tendency to go with the herd and everybody else instead of standing up when things aren't right.
I just last night watched a movie that starred a friend of mine, Kerry Washington. It's called 6888. Have you seen that?
It's on my list to watch. Yeah.
Well, a mutual friend of Kerry and mine sent me a text saying, "Hey, if you haven't watched this, put this on your list." So my wife and I watched it last night. Boy, so much of your story is reflected in that, and they believe in the pilot acronym there. Uh, but Kerry does a terrific performance, and I see a lot of her character, the role she played in you in your real life, and uh, you're a hero to many, and I can understand why you're in such demand to speak to different audiences all over the country, because yours is such an inspirational story. Tell us if people in our community would like to get in touch with you for one reason or another. How do they find you? How do they connect with Elizabeth McCormick?
I am really easy to find. I am pilot speaker everything. So, pilotspeaker.com is my website, pilot speaker on social, pilot speaker on LinkedIn, pilot speaker on every social media platform.
And when you do these speeches, do you often meet people that become a part of your life?
I hear from audience members and meeting planners months and years afterwards. I had one, a boiler manufacturing company. The guy in charge that booked me 7 years ago just transferred to a different division and just hired me to come in for the new division too. So it's always such an honor and joy to stay connected and to know that I've had an impact on other people.
So I have to ask you a current affairs question. Secretary Designate of the Defense Department, Higsworth, is stated publicly several times and vociferously that it doesn't believe women should be in combat roles. What say you?
I've talked about this before publicly. The fact is that there's no longer trenches and front lines in combat. So we're not fighting conventional World War II tactics. They changed with Korea and changed with Vietnam, right? And even Desert Storm and the conflicts we've had in Afghanistan and continued in the Middle East. So combat has changed. There's no longer a front line that says, okay, the women can't be in that front line in combat. It's very fluid. It's insurgent and urban warfare. I think the future warfare we're going to be looking at is going to be cyber and may not even involve front lines at all. So when the front line is fluid, how can you say women can't be in combat when you don't know where the combat's going to be?
Interesting. And as an aviator, Elizabeth, what do you think about how the nature of warfare, combat, has changed in the last, call it 3 years now, with the avalanche of drones and its impact on the battlefield? Those 11 carrier strike groups that the U.S. has around the world don't seem so impregnable anymore, do they?
No, drones and AI and against and making sure those are hardened against cyber warfare also. I mean, those there's a lot of I don't envy the task of staying ahead, and that's really the big thing as a country that we need to do is we need to stay ahead of the technological advances of our enemies.
So you give a talk. It's in Palm Springs, California, and a young woman comes up to you at the end of that talk and stands in a line to get to say hello to you at the end of the speech that you gave, and she said to you, "I'm thinking about a career in the armed services. Is that a good idea?"
So here's what I would say. um, and if I had to do it over again, I hadn't been an army wife and had to do it over again. I would say go Air Force. They treat their people better.
Really?
The bases are in better places. They treat women better. So, I but here's a little known fact: the Army has more pilot spots than any other branch.
No.
Most people think it's the Air Force, and it's not. It's the Army. Think about it: one jet, one refueler, one uh, plane from the Air Force costs a lot more than one helicopter. So we have a lot more helicopters, and because we have more helicopter airframes, we have more spots for pilots. So the Army has the most spots. The Navy is second, then Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, and of course Space Force way down at the bottom there. So
Well, Elizabeth, what an amazing career you've had. You're such a wonderful role model. I can't wait for my grandchildren, to see our conversation that we've had today, to hear it, to see it, because one of the great thrills I get as a grandfather and is to expose my 7 grandkids to remarkable people like you. And I can't wait for them to see you. I hope we get to see you in person sometime soon and I get to introduce you to them. So, Elizabeth McCormick, thanks so much for sharing your story with us. And I think there's going to be an outreach to you. So, one more time, the best way to reach you email is
pilotspeaker.com. Go to my website. There's all my contact information, all my social, everything's pilotspeaker.com.
a terrific story, Elizabeth. Thanks for sharing it with us.